Welcome everyone to this video. I'm just going to put it out there early. This is not going to be easy viewing. And you could say that to some of the other topics I've covered before, but this is in fact the most serious video I've ever made in my life, and I'm kind of nervous about it because, I've never done something like this, and I don't really want to gloss over the things that have happened. So I feel like undue pressure making this video like I've never felt before. And it's interesting because I don't get very many views either, but you have to handle things with respect and consider this like a trigger warning at the start of the video here. There is talks about all sorts of abuse and harassment throughout this video. So obviously, if that's something that could, bring you back to a place where it happened to yourself, then by all means click off this video. I do not hold it against you whatsoever. Now, in June 2020, Ubisoft was exposed by its employees for its abusive workplace culture, and this video will be suggesting how it's managed to effectively carry on like nothing's really happened, which has been incredibly frustrating for somebody who's followed this and really believes that this should have been a much huger deal within the industry. And you just get the vibe that, people aren't particularly bothered anymore. We've all moved on. So given that we did a trigger warning earlier, this part of the video will be where it's most applicable, as I'm going through the allegations of the people from the Kotaku reporting of it from a year ago now, because I feel like it needs to see the light of day again, because I think it was very convenient that all these people came forward and then the gaming community just the industry just kind of moved on as if it all didn't happen really. It was just like, oh no. Anyway, that kind of meme effectively, unfortunately. And I think that's really bad. So as somebody who has kept up with this story for over a year now, I don't remember doing a stream on it. I've remembered tweeted it about many times, signal boosting various people who have been rightfully outspoken about it because it's a terrible thing that's happened and they've been effectively able to get away with so far. I'm just going to, shed a further light to it because not everyone would have known that this happened. Some people obviously don't know that it's happened, so it's not completely deliberate why people don't know that this has happened. And I'm just once again saying that no disappointment will be held against anyone who can't watch this video because they've gone through traumatic events similar to what's being mentioned in this video, or that they're worried that it might mention something that may trigger them. That is perfectly okay. That's the whole reason why I take trigger warnings seriously. Us as people, different things, trigger us or take us back to different situations that we had to deal with that we shouldn't have had to, There's a certain topic that will bring me into a depressed mood almost instantly. And to be honest, it's like an everyday topic conversation usually. So I know people that have gone through some of the worst things, and the way that it's been handled by those around them and investigative powers is utterly sickening. It's unfortunately a sign of society and a reason why Me Too is so important. We need to stop immediately not believing people making allegations and thinking that they're going to gain something out of this, because reliving the most traumatic experience of your life is not something anyone really gains anything from it, to be honest, in my opinion, because you always have those people on social media who immediately doubt you, and imagine how that must feel for said individual. So Sergei Haskray, the company's veteran chief creative officer, overseeing the development of all of its games, resigned following an outpouring of allegations that Haskray had been overseeing the development of an atmosphere of sexism and harassment at the company's headquarters. Cecile Cornet, the company's global head of human resources, left that role following reports of widespread mistrust in HR and its past handling of complaints around sexual harassment and misconduct. The department she oversaw was put under an audit to be conducted by an outside agency. And Ubisoft's centralized editorial group, which is responsible for making key game development decisions and previously consisted of 7 white men, will now be revised according to Ubisoft CEO Yves Guillemot. That move followed the resignation of one of its members and the departure of another, both following allegations of misconduct. So this isn't just like a behaviour perpetuated by the lower ranking members of Ubisoft. This has just kind of taken hold throughout the company. People in positions of power holding over you, which is already a daunting prospect if you have to report them, because it's not ever an easy situation. Now, just imagine that if you're already distrustful of HR because of their previous inaction or regarding, the complaints about sexual harassment and misconduct, if they do nothing about it, where's the incentive for someone else to step forward? They will just continue to suffer in silence, and the person that's putting them through that alleged situation will be able to just continue as if nothing's ever happened and continue to go around potentially doing it to more people. And as you'll see, it's not a rare thing, these kind of awful things happening at Ubisoft, really. And it makes you feel like if the people truly at the top of the company are this bad, how much does the CEO know? Because it's a close-knit, family-run business, or that's how it started off. And members of the Guillemot family all have stayed or managed to stay in positions of power. Hasque is a close friend of the CEO as well. So it's hard to believe that he had no idea about the allegations. So let's go to catalogue a few more of the allegations, shall we? On June 21st, bearing in mind this is 2020, a streamer named Danny said on Twitter that Assassin's Creed Valhalla creative director Ashraf Ismail had lied about being single in order to trick her into a relationship. Ismail soon announced he was stepping down from his role on the game to deal with personal matters. Other women also came forward over social media, citing experiences with Ismail that they believed were a pattern of the creative director leveraging his status in the company and industry to pursue romantic relationships with women under false pretenses. That employee, by the way, has since been fired. So, obviously, evidence was found that he was guilty in that regard. On June 22nd, a person I will name as Andrian, because I have no idea how to pronounce their second name, unfortunately, has done some severely fucked up shit, so this is a warning, again. A marketing manager most recently working on Watch Dogs Legion was accused of sexual harassment and rape, which he now denied in a deleted Medium post. Catherine Johnston, who worked for a gaming marketing firm, said in a Twitter post that at PAX 2014, Andrian pressured her into going to a hotel room with him where he forced himself on her. Neither have replied to requests for comments, but I'm only saying this because that doesn't necessarily mean that the person who made the allegation made it up, for example. Like, just imagine for a second, you all just heard what allegedly that person did to them. Put yourself in that position. Would you want to talk about that to a reporter? I don't think many people would, So that doesn't necessarily mean that it didn't happen. This idea that everyone's just willing to talk about, these horrible things that have happened to them, I don't really know where that idea comes from on social media, It usually takes some brave person to speak out about something to give the courage for others to speak out against an individual, Using the example of an individual that has lots of, allegations against them, it's usually that one person sets off a domino effect, if you will. In late June, word began spreading about a manager at Ubisoft Massive in Sweden who was accused of abusing his power to prey on one of the studio's interns during work hours. and was accused of sexually assaulting her. Two sources told Kotaku that this manager is Massive's current director of consumer experience, Antoine Imond, and that he has been placed on administrative leave while the allegations are investigated. Ubisoft's Swedish studios are where the company makes the Division games and is making a game tied to the James Cameron Avatar movies. And Half a World Away is Ubisoft Singapore, a studio that has contributed large portions of the Assassin's Creed franchise and is making pirate ship combat game called Skull and Bones. On July 6th, a person anonymously posted on the National University of Singapore's official Whisper network that a Ubisoft Singapore employee had allegedly tried to pressure them into sex in exchange for help with the application process to intern at the studio. On July 24th, a follow-up post from supposedly that same anonymous person asked for a way to report what happened without revealing their identity. A HR rep for the Singapore studio commented, encouraging the individual to reach out to Workwell Associates, a consultant agency specializing in workplace harassment and misconduct investigation. A former employee of Ubisoft's Customer Relationship Center in North Carolina told Kotaku that last year she submitted multiple reports of harassment from her manager that included sexist comments, graphic descriptions of women's bodies, and an incident in which her harasser described rape as something that wasn't that bad and could be seen as funny. After multiple reports, the employee told Kotaku that she was encouraged by HR to talk it out with her harasser. I could not trust a single person in power at that office anymore. Later, when the harasser was quietly let go for specific reasons, the source reported that HR gave her a $200 Visa gift card for her trouble. Now let's unpack that a little bit there for a second. Why is it always $200 gift cards, Eagle-eyed viewers will realise that was what was given out when Activision Blizzard fired people in the pursuit of never-ending profits earlier this year. But in this situation, it's even worse because they made serious allegations about an employee of the company, and that employee was no longer there. They're like, okay, let's just give a Visa gift card so that we can all move on from this turgid situation or whatever. The idea to talk it out with the harasser, by the way, is so incredibly stupid. Anyone with a brain would see the immediate problem with that, especially if the person is it's her manager at the time. So this person has a power over them, and, presumably they would be able to use that against her if they talked it out. Because somebody who is willing, potentially, to allegedly do the things and say the things that the manager did would have no trouble, holding power over the person making the allegations and trying to make this all go away, in my opinion. So the thing is, this isn't a new thing at Ubisoft. Neither is the feeling of the internal inaction that Ubisoft do. Apparently, issues around many individuals have been known for years, and they just get shared through the Whisper networks. As a woman, you are warned, stay away from him or he does this. One of the names in the Whisper network, which is consistently repeated, is Maxime Belland, a former Splinter Cell creative director who many heard had allegedly choked a female co-worker at a work party. So that sounds fun, doesn't it? He resigned from the company in July of last year. Another was Tommy Francois, a long-time editorial VP who had a reputation for inappropriate comments and sexual harassment. I had been warned very soon after my arrival at Ubisoft to be very careful around the guy because he was unsafe with women. That was the testimony of one current developer. Another was Stone Chin, a long-time public relations manager at the company who worked out of Ubisoft's San Francisco office for the better part of a decade until he was terminated by the company in recent weeks. Chin's behaviour was frequently discussed in internal Whisper networks, according to two sources familiar with Ubisoft. One female employee was allegedly warned not to be alone with him, although while Chin didn't respond to Kotaku, he made a online post trying to defend himself, where he was addressing a various range of claims about his behaviour. He was like, I also acknowledge that I have failed to understand the gender power dynamic, particularly in the games industry, but he didn't say what that was in specific reference to, which the article goes on later to say. I've not always considered how my actions are received interacting with a woman in this industry, and I apologise for being ignorant to the many nuanced struggles women face every day. Now, on the surface, that sounds not too bad, but he opens up that part almost kind of victim blaming. I've not considered how my actions are received, making that a problem of the person on the receiving end, not the fact of the behaviour that led to that situation. In 2014, an incident reporting to the police, Chin is also allegedly to have sexually assaulted a woman with whom he'd interacted with within the games industry, according to a copy of the document reviewed by Kotaku. In the statement that he made online, Chin denied the assault. The woman who filed the report told Kotaku that the trauma of the assault was compounded by, among other things, the experience of trying to report it to the police. Now, unfortunately, this isn't a one-off occurrence. The attitudes towards this kind of thing coming from within the police are one of the many things that the police need to reform, and fast. And this is going from people who, well, I know people who have been in that situation. They've said the very same thing. And, I have no reason to doubt them at all. Why would you make up that thing? Why would you make up how traumatic the police treated your allegation, and investigation? I could feel the cops' distrust of me at the time, so I opened up a little and explained my job so we could get a conversation going. He seemed interested and perked up a bit. He seemed friendlier towards me, so I went with it. He ended up enthusing about Ubisoft games, wanted to talk a little bit about the ones they made, how he liked Assassin's Creed. Now that's a huge problem, because that just kind of betrays the fact that no matter how serious the allegation is, you're just going to change the subject by saying, oh, well, I really like the games that they make, which in that situation is just like very disheartening for the person trying to make an allegation of an employee of that company. But we'll discuss that idea perhaps a bit later on in the video. Her experience underscored just how painful and intimidating it can be to speak out about behaviour associated with a person or company that is popular. It's a bizarre thing to have to put up with when you're reporting a sexual assault. Even when I reported to the cops, I still had to face that. The cover that these companies get, I've watched it for over a decade. People excuse a lot when they like the company that's responsible. The women speaking out against Chin say that they were frustrated by their efforts to call the long-time PR rep out. This guy's working PR, and he's doing all of these things allegedly. Jesus Christ. Chin was known vector for harassment even before he came to Ubisoft, according to one source, who declined to be named because they're involved in an ongoing investigation. 11 years ago, this person worked at Ubisoft in their PR department, responsible for liaising with game makers and publishers, bringing her into contact with Chin, who at the time worked for Microsoft as its global public relations manager. Chin would allegedly send her solicitous text messages such as invitations to his hotel room and more graphic messages wherein he wrote that he imagined that I gave good head, the source said. The source said she shared these messages at the time with her manager, long-time Ubisoft PR rep Tim Cummins, who eventually became Chin's manager when he came to Ubisoft. My manager knew that I was being propositioned. I would show him the text, and we both sort of just uncomfortably laughed it off. The source expressed anger at a former manager in Ubisoft due to a lack of any apparent consequences over the years, even after multiple reports had been lodged against him. According to a source who still works at Ubisoft, when they lodged their own complaint about the incident of assault, the person was told, "You're not the only ones to report him. Those other ones were in fact multiple women," and according to another source at Ubisoft who says their efforts were stymied. Kotaku spoke to the source involved in that report, who said that they attempted to facilitate their complaint to HR. They were told that the women could not remain anonymous, which is a problem because then that puts face to the traumatic event, and it can quickly escalate into whether or not they believe the woman or the employee, and that can make life very difficult at working at a company, I would imagine. Just think about all the comments from whenever like somebody famous is the focus of some sort of allegations. Think about all the people that are like stans of that person, and how often they are so willing to go on the attack and bat for that person, no matter the cost, to themselves and others. Now extrapolate that to an internalized workplace environment. Obviously there are no stands here, but it can get very awkward very fast. It was also made clear to me that without these women coming forward with their stories, they didn't believe their investigation would yield sufficient misconduct to take action. According to the source, the group of women did not trust HR and desired to take their complaint directly to Laurent Detoc, president of Ubisoft North Central and South American region. Per the source, it didn't go anywhere after that. Many of the incidents cited over the past 7 weeks follow a similar pattern. Men with power at the company abuse it. Sometimes it's straightforward bullying, other times it's sexual harassment or other forms of misconduct. Either no one reports it out of fear or mistrust in HR, or they do and nothing happens. While some current and former employees Kotaku spoke with were aware of cases in which complaints to HR had been acted on, they appear to have been exceptions. Poor handling by HR was cited by a former Ubisoft employee who recently said on Twitter that an Ubisoft Toronto audio director had bullied and emotionally abused her during her time at the company. 3 sources confirmed to Kotaku that the manager in question was Richie Nieto, audio director on Watch Dogs Legion. When the employee explained the issues to HR after handing in her 2 weeks' notice, she was told not to come into work. In response, HR told me to stay at home for my 2 weeks as it wasn't a safe environment, but tried to convince me not to leave the studio. According to her, HR offered to move her to a different project to try and get her to not leave, but never mentioned anything about addressing Nieto's behaviour. As of this moment, Nieto is no longer with the company, but it was not given information over whether he was investigated or fired over the allegation. Now, to talk about like the higher ups, to kind of wrap things up a little bit, to some, the status of the aforementioned Maxime Balland and Tommy Francois in the company exemplified the apparent impunity powerful men have enjoyed at Ubisoft. They weren't just men about whom there were whispered networks and complaints, they were men who rose to some of Ubisoft's most powerful position. Balland, a veteran of the company, was appointed to the group earlier this year after a brief stint at Epic Games. Despite the notorious story about him allegedly choking a female co-worker at a work event, Francois, an editorial VP who's been in that position for 5 years, has been accused of sexual harassment and misconduct as well. Reports by Liberation, Bloomberg and Business Insider showed an alleged pattern of sexual harassment and misconduct, including unwanted advances and groping that went on for years, was in some instances reported to HR but ultimately never addressed until now. On June 26, Bloomberg reported that Balland and Francois had been placed on administrative leave while Ubisoft investigated some of the allegations against them. On July 3rd, 2 days after Kotaku emailed Ubisoft with an extensive list of questions regarding some of Balland's past behaviour and how it was addressed by HR, Guillemot announced Balland's resignation. Francois left the company on July 31st, but Ubisoft didn't say whether he resigned or was fired as a result of the investigation. Both Balland and Francois were promoted by Chief Creative Officer Serge Hascoe, a 32-year veteran of the company who helped oversee the rise of its biggest blockbusters like Assassin's Creed, Far Cry and Watch Dogs. Described by some as Guillemot's right-hand man, Hascoe has been accused of not just of misconduct himself, but creating an atmosphere of sexism, harassment and misconduct within the Paris office where the editorial team is based. According to Liberation and Bloomberg's reporting, Hascoe managed Ubisoft's all-powerful Paris headquarters like a boys' club where sexual harassment, inappropriate jokes and heavy drinking were common. A July 10th report by Liberation contains allegations that Hascoe would make sexually explicit comments to other employees and allegedly serving them cakes with drugs inside without their knowledge. Now you can just see how bad that is. You know, that is basically spiking someone without their consent. That surely must be a punishable crime nearly anywhere in the world. Bloomberg reports that during high-level creative meetings for a big upcoming game, Hascoe waited for one of the creative leads making a presentation to leave the room before pulling up a French song on YouTube about a woman performing sex acts who happened to share the name as the person who'd been presenting. This was the same man responsible for calling all of the creative shots in the company, deciding whether entire projects would live or die, originally hired to Ubisoft the same year Guillemot became CEO. And because of all major creative decisions flowed through his office, development leads were forced to meet with him and his team whenever their projects neared a new milestone. I was warned beforehand how to act appropriately in front of them, and that I shouldn't stay for dinner with Serge if he has asked us out. If we had dinner together, I'm supposed to eat and then leave, so there were definitely behavioural red flags that were going on. Despite the serious allegations against him, Hascoe was not fired, and there's no sign that he has been investigated. On July 11th, the day after Liberation's second report about the Paris office, Guillemot announced that following a conversation with his longtime colleague, the two had mutually agreed that it would be best for Hascoe to resign. Well, that's convenient. Some members of staff, though, were surprised that they were expecting Yves to cut off his own arm before firing Serge. Now, it's very convenient, though, that it follows a year where Ubisoft, weren't doing so well financially. The Division 2 and Ghost Recon Breakpoint underperformed, and their stock price sank to $10 at one point, almost half of what it peaked at a year before. So, it's convenient timing. This was where they made the decision of, after it's not longer going to be the decision of one dude over, the creative decisions of the company. So they were going to change their approach. We're yet to see whether that, has actually happened. It's neither here or there. It's just convenient time, to, let someone go after a year of underperformance. Especially when every company is specifically set up to make as much money as possible, We all know that. The thing is, just cutting the head off the snake doesn't mean that all these issues, that's happened. They've fired a few people at the top of the company. That's it then. Job done. We can now continue to consume with no guilt whatsoever. Whatever. The problem is, it goes so much deeper than just a select few people at the top of the company. Those being accused are various different studios across the world, and those at different positions of power within the company. So it goes within reason that if you're a female employee at Ubisoft, at one point or another, you were probably uncomfortable or warned to stay away from certain individuals. I think it's safe to say those were a lot of incredibly serious allegations, and I don't think we really scratched the surface, really, to be honest with you. I don't know how many sheer allegations there are, to be fair. There's probably countless. I've seen regular postings and articles about how Ubisoft haven't really changed the workplace culture at all. And I think it's just the fact that they were immediately able to kind of move on as if nothing really happened. And of course they had a PR pushback for a bit, but like immediately I think they were able to recover that. Or at least from the outside, it looks like they were able to just carry on like nothing happened within just a few weeks of this all blowing up. And the thing is, the allegations were still coming out while they were doing their, yearly promotional event about all of their games coming up, They were doing that in the midst of this. And they didn't mention it at all. They didn't apologise during their showcase on July 12th last year. They had about just over 1 million viewers. And all they ever really posted about was the games that were like showcased there, And I chose not to watch it because I just thought it was in poor taste, in my opinion anyway, just to do it so quick. And I'm aware, and it might be uncharitable, but I'm aware that these things are, scheduled way in advance. But it's Ubisoft's replacement E3 event, right? Which was virtual. They could have quite easily cancelled it and delayed it for a later date, They are the masters of their own destiny if it's their own promotional event, in my opinion. And in my opinion, there are more important things than new games coming out. Workplace culture. One of that, which is an abundance of abuse from employees to each other, or management to employees, that would constitute as being more important than games, in my opinion. Maybe that's a controversial opinion. I highly doubt it. I think most people will look at that and go, yeah, no, that is perfectly reasonable. It really gave them the onus just to carry on. I believe that was when the first mention of Far Cry 6 came out, and that was obviously, that's huge for them. I remember seeing like the trailer or something, like a few weeks later after the event or whatever, and you obviously have like Giancarlo Esposito as the next Far Cry villain. And, he's been in Breaking Bad, Better Call Saul, so many other things. Like, I could go in a list of things he's been in. He's an incredible actor, right? So they would get positive PR by having them in the game. It's obviously not his fault. He is not responsible for what's going on at Ubisoft. And let's be real, of course, the deliberate marketing of the cuteness overload of the dog companion, who has like the little, for want of a better word, like stabilizer to replace one of his leg or something, That was trending all over social media, during the time. So any sort of like attempt to hold Ubisoft to accountability hit that incredible roadblock of people are now distracted by the fact that, their heavy hitter franchises just been announced for, relatively soon after. So I think that gave them the power to just carry on like nothing happened, and maybe here and there announce like a few changes, if you will, in the aftermath, and then just carry on like, oh well, we've done our part or something, when you're doing the absolute bare minimum. For example, Ubisoft are like investigating themselves, which is always a weird thing. I've always wondered about the transparency when you even order someone to investigate you, and what happens with that information. Does it all completely get shared to the public, or do you just, release the bits that you want people to know? I guess you can't really know unless those who have access to that information are the only ones that could know that kind of thing, I guess. In terms of like basic things that, shouldn't really be celebrated because it's happening after the fact, In the weeks that followed, the CEO announced the creation of 2 new positions, Head of Workplace Culture and Head of Diversity and Inclusion, both of which would report directly to him. The first has been filled by Lidwine Vernay-Sauer, a 15-year veteran of the company. The second is still vacant. It's been filled by now. This is an old story. In addition, employee listening sessions and a global survey are being administered by an outside firm. A spokesperson for Ubisoft told Kotaku the feedback from them will be used to shape future policies and procedures around the company's workplace culture. On a July 22nd call with investors, Gilmour was asked if he took any responsibility for a company culture that appeared to tolerate misconduct and a system of HR that swept issues under the rug when they were reported. In fact, each time we have been made aware of this conduct, we have made actually tough decisions. And we made sure those decisions had a clear and positive impact. So that's very important. It has now become certain that certain individuals betrayed the trust I placed in them and didn't live up to Ubisoft's core shared values. So I have never compromised on my core values and ethics, and never will. I will continue to run and transform Ubisoft to face today's and tomorrow's challenges. I'm sorry, I just don't buy it. I just don't buy that his lieutenant of 32 years, he just didn't know about it and he didn't do anything to shut it all up. I just find that way too unbelievable. The problem is, just because he's employed somebody who has 15 years within the company, it's not an inherently bad thing, but given that the allegations were so widespread, I would have thought that it might have been slightly better and more logical to bring in someone from the outside, so 100% sure that they definitely can't have any sort of allegations against them from within the company. Like, at this point, wouldn't it be better to be safe than sorry? And that adds the questions of, like, does the fact that they're a popular company allow them to carry on with less scrutiny? If they didn't have popular franchises like Assassin's Creed, Far Cry, Watch Dogs or whatever, insert franchise here. I mean, Ubisoft make a wide variety of games to cater to various different tastes, right? If they made games that people hated, would people be more harshly critical on them? That's a question we have to ask ourselves. I don't know the answer to that, so I'm just going to ask you open-ended questions. I don't know. Are people that already hate Ubisoft the only ones that are willing to, hold them accountable? And I don't put myself in that category. As you'll see that I own Ubisoft games. I was a huge Assassin's Creed fan, and I stopped playing it a little while ago. I kind of feel uncomfortable with the idea of playing Ubisoft games, but I have for relevant capture for this video. I was more disappointed, if anything, and surprised that this kind of thing can go on, I guess we're all a bit like, we all know nothing that goes on at these companies, and that's probably why it's such a surprise. But now that it's happened with them, each time a company comes out and it's, this bad, so to speak, or maybe even worse, who knows, then we're not going to be surprised anymore. Of course, there's a subsection who have, told people to stop talking about the Ubisoft thing because it's old news or something. And I find it really difficult to understand that mindset personally. The things I believe just cannot comprehend that, unfortunately. I don't understand, and I don't wish to understand that kind of thinking, unfortunately. And it begs the question, do most people only care about the quality of games and not the experiences of those who work on them? I mean, the case can be made for that. Naughty Dog has a culture of crunch. Their games are still popular. Rockstar. Nearly every major corporation and game that comes out has some sort of workers' crunch where they're pushing people to the edge. And often a talking point within that, it's not ideal, but it's justified, It's bad. What I often see, that when a game is considered to be bad by people, they say that crunch is bad. But a lot of the time, if the game is good, they will justify it and said, well, the crunch was needed to make it this good. But it's not an apple to apple comparison, is it? I don't think those people, at least I hope they wouldn't, would say that, abuse is required at your workplace to make a good game. But why has Ubisoft been left off the leash, so to speak? by those who actually know it's going on. That's what I'm interested about, because obviously not everyone is actively watching games media news all the time. So a lot of people, you know, the news can be a very negative thing, even in the entertainment industry. You know, countless allegations of people doing terrible things happen at a regular time, because as a society we've moved past the fact that we think this is a perfectly natural and okay thing. I would like to think anyway. There are some people that are obviously still ignorant of that, but eventually we all move with the times, kind of thing. Now it could be a thing where people could, it's not a, I don't think it would be an uncommon thing that people just, you know, enjoy their hobby as like an escape and just don't really want to find out that much more about it. Not because they'll think it's inherently bad to find out about that, but they're like, they just don't have the time or whatever. So that could be a factor in itself, that the story wasn't seen by enough people to really make it into a social movement, to be fair. That's another factor in itself. And the games media themselves are somewhat responsible for the fact that in a few short weeks they were talking from this as a huge story, and like finally they appeared to care about workplace like abuse, and it felt like this was going to become a thing, and you know, consequences might have been had. But then a few weeks down the line they're just reporting on, you know, as they would normally with Ubisoft games. You know, nobody decided like maybe this was in poor taste to what we had like reported a few weeks earlier. So I don't necessarily blame people for not seeing this story, you know. We're constantly inundated with information, and the games media themselves carried on like nothing's happened. So to close, this obviously isn't to shame anyone playing Ubisoft games. You are literally free to do whatever you like with your own time. If you want to play Ubisoft games, by all means. I'm playing one to get captured for this video right now. It's up to a personal decision of yourself whether you want to continue to support the company or not. Let's be real though, they're not going anywhere. They've managed to basically get away with it. It's your decision at the end of the day. I'm not going to rail against you for playing Ubisoft games. Personally, I'm probably going to avoid them from now on, you know. Funnily enough, Far Cry is like my favourite franchise, and now like any sort of enthusiasm I had for Far Cry 6, I don't have anymore. You know what the unfortunate thing was? I literally just finished like Far Cry 5 or whatever, and then a moment of weeks later, this whole shit came out. I was like, oh, yeah. And I can't say I miss the Ubisoft games that much anyway, to be honest with you. You just get used to playing the similar games that they design over and over again, kind of thing. Because they aren't that creative. They make one type of game and then extrapolate those game mechanics and then stick them in all the other games that they own, to be honest. Or at least did under the previous creative direction. I just hope that one day they may face some sort of real consequence. But I feel that's very naive of me. Because, I mean, the heat was on a year ago, right? And yeah, employees left, but they left. They weren't fired. The higher-ups at the top of the company weren't fired. So it was kind of a cowardly response, in my opinion, to something so major. And that was when the heat was on, when people were actively engaged with this story. And the longer time goes by, and if you're able to control the narrative around your company to get people to speak about your games instead, the heat slowly dies down, unfortunately. At the very least, they should work as hard as they possibly can to make the workplace better for the people that unfortunately have suffered for years because of this toxic environment, and no doubt had like all sorts of like traumatic and miserable experience. But on that unfortunate note, thanks for watching. I hope to see you in the next video.